Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you're watching this webinar. This is Dave Nagel, and I'm really excited to share some information with my friends and colleagues in Central Unified as we prepare for our Impact Cycle work for Visible Learning for Teachers 2 on January the 6th. So I'm going to jump right in. And I want to let everyone know, and for the high school folks, you worked with Dr. B.R. Jones back in July. On day 2, we all got a chance to meet on day 1 for the foundation day for the teachers. He just couldn't join me on this webinar today, but he certainly sends his best and is very excited to join the high school group. But this is a check-in to make sure we're doing the most to prepare for the learning of everyone going into January the 6th. So I'm going to jump right in with some success criteria. The learning target for this particular webinar is that we recognize what next steps you or your impact partner need to take to successfully complete as best you can your impact cycle or impact cycles before we come together on January 6th. And I think for some of you, it's obvious based on where you've moved on and moved forward in your Google Docs that you're going to be pretty ready to be prepared and share. I think there's a chance some others, if you haven't uploaded some things, maybe it's just that there's not been some additional information added to your Google folder that's been completed. But there's a chance some of you, as you go through this, you go, wow, I'm not going to be completely ready for that day in terms of having my impact cycle complete like everybody else's. That's okay. What I want to just make sure everybody's hearing now is that even in these next 3 weeks, and certainly the time before the holidays is always a busy time at all levels, but that we can bring as much of what we have done or accomplished in our impact cycles, or even if we haven't touched it since September or even July, something with us that helps us move forward in our learning and be able to share, because a good chunk of the morning is related to us sharing ideas and resources with our peers. So success criteria to be able to meet the learning intention is that you create a plan starting now, whenever you're watching this webinar, to ensure that you and or your impact partner can learn how your current teaching actions are impacting student learning in your classrooms. That's the whole point of visible learning, is that we are monitoring the impact. Is what we are doing having the best impact on student learning? And then secondly, if there's any specific learning gaps based on some of the things we share here, or some of the tools that are in the Google folder, or anything at all, to generate questions for myself or Dr. Jones to best support everyone as we move together on January the 6th. And so the overarching question is, how are we developing assessment-capable, visible learners in Central Unified schools and classrooms? To what extent are students becoming more able to answer the 3 core questions of a visible learner of where am I going, how am I going, and where to next? And what do my students think about learning and how they learn and how we learn as adults with them? Something that I mentioned, and I know BR did as well when we were there last time when we looked at Graham Nuthall's research, that 40-50% of what we teach students, a lot of times they already know or know to some degree. And when we think about conceptual learning, which is a lot of what takes place in all of our lives, but especially in school, we don't necessarily get it. Over time, we are getting it. And we've all had that aha moment when we're driving in the car or we're cutting our grass and we go, oh my gosh, I put it all together. I just figured it out. A lot of times there's elements of learning that students actually have that we make them go back through again. And so we want to really dig in. And when we look at the research around teacher-student relationships and the impact of non-directivity, where I'm not mandating and exactly how a student learns and how they demonstrate their learning, that's where we see the highest effects. So this is still going to take in and apply a lot of those core elements of visible learning as we move forward in all of our work in Central, but specifically moving forward in January the 6th. So let's take a quick visit to where we've been. We came back in July. Seems like it was a long time ago, and certainly it was a few degrees warmer than I know it is now, but that foundation day and visible learning for action for teachers, it's where we plan for gathering the evidence you will or would have used to start your impact cycle. And that was to focus on the extent to which your learners were assessment capable or visible learners and the impact you were then having on their learning over time, which has been since July up until now, going until January. And so what we need to think about going into January 6th for that day to be as successful as possible, the teachers come with as much of their impact cycles completed. So for some of you, and I've gone into several of the documents and BRS as well, and made notes or comments to where, hey, did you follow through on this plan or this action? Whatever you can get to bring at least 4 printed copies of your entire cycle, because we'll do a rotation in the morning where we do a jigsaw, and we have a protocol where you'll share with a group of 4 what you've learned and what your next steps were. And it's important to bring any artifacts, any examples, any handouts, worksheets. Sometimes people bring their computer and they show pictures on their screen, but it's really powerful to learn from our peers. And then embedded within that impact cycle, specific examples of how you've put actions or strategies in place to help your students become more assessment capable. What have you done to help them become more owning their own learning, and how have you seen the impact of that? And then, of course, as always, any specific questions moving forward related to any of the pieces of visible learning we've been working on. So when we think about what John Hattie would say, the dispositions that we need to be asking ourselves on a consistent basis, and this is all of us, this isn't just teachers, this is certainly administrators as well, but how do I know what I am doing with my students or with my learners? And for the administrators on this, that means our adult learners, how do I know it's working? And what's the magnitude? What gives me the evidence to know this is worth learning, this is worth focusing on? The reason why we talked about having the examples brought is, where have I seen this in practice? Where is another peer in Central that maybe is in my school, or maybe at my same grade level, or maybe they're at a completely different grade level, that they're putting the same types of actions in practice? What would convince me also that I'm wrong? One thing that an evaluator does is they seek negative evidence. So what would let me know that, okay, even though this might not have been a total failure, it didn't work as well as it should have? These are the kind of questions we should always be asking, but really the ones that drive the need for our impact cycles. And so I want to review, if you remember when we were together in the Visible Learning for Teachers Manual, page 16, where we had a rating looking at some specific things that visible learners would say or do on a consistent basis. We asked us to answer these questions if it was commonplace. It exists, but not commonplace yet. Small number of students. It's not established at all, or I don't know yet. I need to gather more information. It's just an example from one of the manuals that I took a picture of when I was in the room with my group. So if you haven't done much since that day, this is a great place to go back to and say, where was I, and am I seeing more of these things happening with my students? As we look at the impact cycle process and steps, gathered evidence, what were my learners' needs, my leads in relationship to that, what did I plan to implement and change, and how am I monitoring those actions? Again, pretty simple, but also very powerful for following that step and that process in the impact cycle, which I'm going to review here and give us maybe a little bit of insight as we move forward. So what most of us were able to do on those first 2 days together was determine our evidence gathering plan, to learn to build our baseline evidence statements, and choose a focus area that hopefully got us into what were our learning needs moving forward at the first part of this semester. And I'm going to refer everyone, I'll do this at the very end of the webinar, if you need to go back to the Visible Learning for Teachers 1 manual and some of the case studies that were in there. But what did I want to find out? How did I gather my evidence? That was sort of the first part of the plan moving forward that we tried to gather those first 2 days. And so what did I want to find out? What tools was I going to use? So I'm going to share with you one of the examples I just pulled from the documents. I believe this was from Harvest Elementary, but the activity, the date, and what they found in terms of asking their students, what are we looking for in terms of what makes a good learner? The staff development, where the staff was asked to make posters. And that's a really important piece that we as the adults figure out and determine, what do we really believe a good learner really is? And then the baseline evidence statement that came from this particular group was that students primarily reported that good learning was tied to behavior and doing well on assessments, but also had qualities related to effort and staying focused. And then that is what all of us should have been able to do at some point in time. And if we haven't yet, if you haven't gathered that evidence, this is the time to do that, even in the next couple of weeks. And this is that same example I showed a minute ago, where they videotaped, and then you see some of their baseline statements where students talked about some of the comments they made when students reported out what makes a good learner. Share a couple other baseline evidence statements from some schools we've been working with. I've personally been working with this fall. Students generally found it difficult to recall what they had done well on an assessment. Assessments, even if they were returned the day before. Students, 68 out of 84 surveyed viewed feedback in the form of grades or points, but they didn't necessarily view feedback related to what helps them learn, only 17. So these are the kind of baseline evidence statements that I'm really going to encourage us to go in and dig and be, for that second one, quantitative if possible. Sometimes it's more qualitative, like the one above. Students generally found it difficult. My students focused more on behavior than they did academic pieces. Most of the students also connected good learning to the grade the teacher gave them. So again, some will be measurable, and that's what I'm going to encourage, and then some, it's more relative, most of the students. I'll share a couple high school baseline evidence statements from a district in Illinois. Students generally found it difficult to recall what they were learning for the daily objective, or what they call their mastery learning objective. Most students stated that they would know what they had learned, the success criteria when they got their papers or tasks back with a grade. And not that the grades aren't going to be there, but that doesn't necessarily always help them know what they've learned unless that criteria for success, or success criteria as we call it in visible learning, is understood. So it should have been happening since August, and if you haven't, as I mentioned before, it's not about just completing all 9 steps to complete them. The more you can have finished, but finished with quality, sure, but these were the things that should have been happening all along and will continue to happen after January 6th. Part of January 6th is to move on into another impact cycle. So it's possible for some teachers, hey, I'm going to get as far as I can in this one, and then I'm going to continue this one moving on next semester. There's nothing wrong with that. All I'm going to do is to encourage you, whatever experiences you have coming to the table is going to make you more inclined to make connections with your own learning to move forward. So it's identifying what I need to change, setting some targets, implementing. When I'm finished, what was my statement, and then where do I go to next? So our focus area would have been something where, for example, here, improve the student's ability to explain how they connect literacy into their science classroom projects and tasks. Most of the impact cycles of the teachers in Central, and it's a good place to start, focusing on good learners, focusing on feedback. I wanted to share, though, that as we move forward and we get really good at this, now we can bring in a little bit deeper level of content and quality. As a science teacher myself, biology teacher, students couldn't read or write with strong literacy. It was going to be very difficult for them to be successful. So how can I monitor that? And then I need to then determine, what do I need to change? What my students need to change? And if there's something with the parents that they would need to change, I need to realize it comes back to me. So I might need to be more intentional with my email newsletters and what I send home to parents and information, not just about the grade, but how they're connecting their reading skills into my science classrooms. So again, what I'm also kind of describing is, if you haven't gotten anywhere near this depth, where you might be coming to in January, because we're going to have some time those days to learn, but also plan moving forward. And again, the plan for the 6th is that to continue on with another impact cycle, or go deeper with the one you've started because maybe you haven't finished around these areas. So you might go back and just monitor and collect some of the same type of evidence at the secondary level. Sometimes we change classes at the semester, so it might be a new group of students. For middle and elementary, it might be the same students that we go back and ask some of the same questions again. Finally, if we haven't done enough where we connect with our impact partner, their role is so important because they can support us, they can coach us, they can be a problem solver when we run into a gap. So it's something we're really going to talk about, having more intentionality so that our impact partners are monitoring our Google Docs and us theirs. But this should be what we use for our reflection and teaching. One of the conversations we had in a recent conference call, getting ready to work on the day, is how this should be part of that teacher evaluation of their reflection of learning. It shouldn't be something extra that we do. It should be really the work we're expected to do, and helps monitor how our teaching is going with our students. I do want to just finally finish with, it's not a bad idea to go back to the case study examples in the Visible Learning for Teachers manual, or to go into the Google folder where there's middle school and high school examples or your own school files, and then dig into some of these to go, okay, now I've seen another one. I'm going to do my best with this one that I have, but I'm going to come January 6th ready to learn and maybe implement even deeper second semester. So it's a challenge to push everybody to move forward, but not with panic where we're just trying to complete it. But again, when you come together on that day, and Dr. Jones or I put you in your groups, the more you share is going to benefit your peers, and the more they bring and share and complete is going to benefit you. So it's really a give one, get four opportunity. And so that's why there's a little bit of accountability for all of us to bring whatever we can completed to improve all of our learning at the best levels. If you have any thoughts or questions, please send me an email. I've sent to Kitty Davis some dates and times that I'm available in the next several weeks for any of the administrators and teams or teachers that would want to have a conference call, a webinar, anything at all. And certainly that's going to extend after January 6th as well. But if there's any time here in the upcoming weeks to help support you in any way we can, please let us know. Have a great rest of 2016. We'll look forward to seeing you in January, and I look forward to talking to a lot of you very soon, hopefully in the next couple weeks, as we get ready for January 6th. Thanks, and have an awesome day.